So today we're going to talk about 17 Seconds by The Cure. It's their second album. It came out in 1980, and it is, in my opinion, their first real foray into goth rock. Despite Robert Smith's protests and him saying that he is not a goth and The Cure is not a goth band, everyone kind of sees The Cure as a goth band. And when I talked about their first record, Three Imaginary Boys, I said that that wasn't a goth record, which is absolutely true. It's not goth in the slightest. But with this second album, 17 Seconds, I think that's kind of when they turn into a goth band. 17 Seconds isn't The Cure's darkest record, but it's certainly where the darkness comes to the forefront for the first time. Prior to the making of this album, the band actually lost their bassist. Michael Dembski was the original bassist, and he wanted to do stuff that was more in the vein of Three Imaginary Boys, more poppy, more upbeat. But then Robert Smith was writing all this stuff that was kind of dark and moody and atmospheric, and he was like, I'm not really into this. So he left the band, and Simon Gallup became the official bassist for The Cure, which is a position that he holds today. I would really love to know what people thought about this record whenever it very first came out, just because of the fact that it is so different from Three Imaginary Boys. There aren't really any obvious pop singles like Boys Don't Cry, there's nothing real bouncy, and the record is very homogenous in how it sounds. And so because of that, I feel like it's a record where if you're like 3 or 4 songs in and you're not having a good time, then just turn it off, you're not going to enjoy the rest of it. And as I was saying, this record is much more atmospheric than Three Imaginary Boys. And I also think it's a lot more mysterious of a record. It's a lot more cryptic lyrically. I think the cover art is a perfect representation of the album, just because of the fact that looking at the cover art, you know that you're looking at a forest, you can make out some trees, but even though you know that you're looking at a forest, it's a blurry, out of focus picture. And then if you open up the record for more clues, then the record sleeve has the album cover on the front, and then the back of it is the album cover in reverse. It's flipped over on one side, and instead of white and black, it's just black and red. I looked at my copy of the record itself, and I looked at the CD, and there isn't a lyric sheet anywhere. Normally, whenever you buy a CD, there's a lyrics booklet included, or normally whenever you buy a record, the lyrics are printed on the sleeve or something, but you don't get any of that with this album. There's so much about the album that is just hazy and mysterious and is completely different than Three Imaginary Boys. So with all that established, let's go ahead and jump into the track listing. So the first track on the album is A Reflection. It's basically a 2-minute long instrumental track with some piano and guitar. Robert Smith has said that the track was intended to set the listener in a contemplative mood. And that was his wording, a contemplative mood. And I think the track accomplishes its intended purpose very well, just because of the fact that you're listening to it for, like I said, like 2 minutes, and you're just like, wow, what is this leading up to? It's very ominous sounding, and I feel like it sets the mood very, very well. I had this thought not long ago that if Three Imaginary Boys is a bounce castle, then 17 Seconds is a haunted manor. Track 2 on the album is Play for Today, which actually works really well as an arena anthem, which is shocking because this is 17 Seconds we're talking about. But if you listen to live versions of the song, then the crowd seems to sing along with the melody of it, which is actually kind of interesting. There's a lyric that stands out to me on this song, "Tell me I'm wrong, I don't really care," and that exemplifies everything about The Cure, I think. This is a band that has always done exactly what they want to do. And really, that's a kind of mindset that I aspire to. I have a lot of respect for it. But I think it's fair to say that this is our real first taste of the album. And one thing that's very apparent to me whenever I listen to this record is that every instrument on the record sounds so restrained. The drums have a very dry feel to them, they sound almost muffled at times, and I thought it was a drum machine, but it's not. I don't know enough about drum production, but it sounds like they just mic'd the drums a certain way. I did read though that one of the reasons why people think that it's a drum machine playing and not an actual drummer is because of the fact that they chopped up Lowell Tolhurst's drums and they spliced his playing into bars of 16 or 32 and would just loop that for certain songs. And I don't think that's considered unusual for record production. I feel like it's pretty common, but at the same time, I think that it gives the record a very unique feel. And as I was saying, the guitars feel very restrained. It doesn't feel like there's anything wild or crazy going on, and it feels very thoughtful. John Frusciante of the Red Hot Chili Peppers has talked about this record before, and he said that he feels like the chord progressions on this album, and like Faith for instance, are very simple, but they're very well thought out. In other words, the guitars aren't simple because of naivety or because of a lack of knowledge with regards to playing, but they're simple because that's what Robert Smith wanted them to be. Again, it goes back to the idea, tell me I'm wrong, I don't really care. And then the idea of play for today is something that I really like too, just this emphasis that you should focus on the day, because it kind of foreshadows an idea that would appear in a Nine Inch Nails song much later on. This isn't meant to last, this is for right now. I'm probably the only one who will ever make that connection, but whatever, I love Broken, so. Track 3 is Secrets, and the very first thing I want to point out is how the vocals sound. They're not upfront like Play for Today or most other songs, but rather it feels like they're kind of faded into the background a bit. And again, this isn't because the Cure didn't know what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing. It's an artistic choice to make Robert Smith's vocals sound so distant and faded. But secrets are seldom a good thing, and so he's essentially singing about a disconnect between him and someone else. I think one of the key lyrics is "I thought I was yours." So it's essentially kind of a breakup song. But yeah, Secrets is one of my favorite songs off this record, and it's something that takes some time to get used to. Again, just because of the faded vocals, I feel like a lot of people will pass this song up, but I really think it's a gem. Track 4 is In Your House, and it basically has this entire vibe to it where it's like you're somewhere you're not supposed to be. It has that real kind of creepy, anxious feeling. And as I was saying earlier, I would describe this album as a haunted house. A haunted house surrounded by a forest, I guess. This isn't really like an angry album. It's not very in your face. It's very subdued, but it's all about creating this uncomfortable mood within the listener, I think. And whenever I say uncomfortable mood, I don't mean that the album is sucky or whatever. Like, the album's a banger. I love this album. I don't mean that it's a pain to listen to, because it's not. It's pure joy. But rather, I feel like if you're not prepared for it, it can be quite discomforting. In Your House has some really weird lyrics. He sings about swimming at night in your house. And there's this entire feeling of being lost. And as I was saying earlier, it feels like the lyrics, especially on this song, are very cryptic and intentionally so. But the thing is that they're interesting. Even though you don't know exactly what he's singing about, there's still something there. As I was saying, the album art is a perfect representation of how the album sounds. And again, as I was saying, if you don't vibe with the first couple tracks of this record, you're not gonna vibe with the rest. If you don't like what you've heard so far, then the album just isn't for you, and that's okay. But for everyone who does like it, it's a banger. Track 5 is called 3, and Robert Smith has described this song before as being about the eternal trinity, and I can't help but feel that that is one of the most cryptic and unclear descriptions that you could give of literally anything. The lyrics to this song take on the form of a very muffled conversation. Like the song Secrets, you can't really make out too many of the words, but the words that you can make out are usually not great. Whenever I was listening to the song earlier just before filming this, one of the words that stood out to me was scream, which is not very good word, not a very happy, exciting word. I mean, unless you're talking about ice cream, you know, like ice cream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. Like, that's kind of the only time when the word scream is going to be good. So I don't know, maybe it's a song about ice cream, but I have a feeling it's not. The conversation kind of struck me as like a military type thing, which is never good. So if you're listening to the actual record, the actual vinyl record, then this is when you would flip it over and you would turn it to side B, which starts off with the final sound. And I think the final sound is meant to serve the same purpose as a reflection off side A. In other words, it's supposed to set you in a contemplative mood, only the final sound is more discomforting. I keep on using that word, but it's more discomforting than a reflection. The final sound is just a, sounds like someone hitting the wrong notes on a piano, essentially. So yeah, it's not meant to make you happy. Then finally we get to A Forest, which is kind of the hit of the record. It's about 6 minutes long, so it's one of the longest tracks on the record, but still it's managed to be successful in spite of that. And honestly, it's a banger. Of the tracks on the album, it is probably one of the more upbeat ones, but still, it's not a very happy song. My interpretation of the lyrics is that the narrator sees a girl in the forest and chases after her, and then realizes that there never was a girl and he was just seeing things, which I suppose could serve as a metaphor for a billion different things. You know, chasing after things that you think will make you happy but ultimately won't. I guess that in some ways it actually kind of foreshadows Going Nowhere off of the self-titled Cure record. What I mean by that is that Going Nowhere is a song about not getting anywhere in life and being stuck in the same place, and I think that A Forest can be seen as being about the same thing. Essentially, you pursue something and you're no better off than you were whenever you first began. Or I think you could be worse. You know, if you run into the forest chasing someone and it turns out there's not a person at all, then it's like, what did you see? Why are you in the forest now? Was it a witch? Was it a skinwalker you saw? And I'm being kind of silly, but at the same time, there's a lot of very rich and deep symbolism behind forests. I'm sure this goes back further, but the Puritans really exemplified this. Because Puritans loved the forest, they loved the wilderness because it was created by God and everything, but at the same time, they saw the forest and the wilderness as fallen. The Puritans believed that the devil had control over the wilderness and over the forest, but also they believed that God created the forest and God would show them signs through the form of like sticks on the ground or something. And so with Puritans, there's this really interesting tug and pull between what the forest is supposed to represent. And I think that in some ways, this is something that we've carried with us into modern society. What I mean to say is that everyone sees nature as like a place of healing. It's good to be out in nature, but at the same time, forests, especially at night, Night are very scary. They're scary because you don't know what's there. There are all sorts of animals and creatures and you know, bears and snakes and whatever else. And then if you stack the layer of folklore on top of it, then, you know, there are witches. So all in all, forests can be very scary things. And so I think that's where a lot of my enjoyment of this song comes from. The forest, just as like a historical symbol, is really interesting. And then it's worth noting that in the 90s, they would extend this song for a really long time. So like I said, the album version is like 6 minutes, but there's a version on YouTube where it's like 12 or 14 minutes or something like that. And Robert Smith sings an extra verse. So that's really cool and that's worth looking up. I'll drop a link down below. But yeah, A Forest is a banger. It's a song that's on their greatest hits record, and it's one that a lot of people know. Track 8 is M, which is one of my favorites, and it seems to me to be about a relationship and the struggles that come with that. There's a lyric in the song, "You'll fall in love with somebody else tonight," and that's a lyric that's very anxious to me. It's very anxiety inducing in me, because it strikes on an insecurity that a lot of people have. That being the insecurity that someone is currently with them, but the person, their partner, will inevitably go and be with someone else, and the person will be alone in the end. And it's certainly a feeling that I felt before and have been justified in feeling, and so that's why that lyric is so scary. But there's something that's said in the Brothers Karamazov that has always stuck with me. One character asks the question, if you have to worry about your partner and your lover, are they really a lover or partner worth keeping? Essentially, if you feel like you can't trust someone, should you be with them? And the answer is kind of a no, you know, you should be with someone who you can trust. But M is probably the most aggressive song on the record, but aggressive is probably an overstatement because, as I was saying earlier, everything about this album feels very restrained, including the guitar. It's worth noting that there's a solo about 2/3 of the way through, and there's an audio error. It's present on every copy of the album I own. It's present on the vinyl release and on the CD and on the Spotify version, but on the guitar solo at one point, just it cuts out of one ear. It cuts out of like the left ear for like a split second. And if you're listening to it through speakers, you probably wouldn't notice, but if you're listening to headphones, it's very clear. I don't know if it's present on the original release or if it was a problem with the remastering, but regardless, it's just a little something that gives the song a little bit of character. There's also a remix of this song that Robert Smith did in 2018 for the Mixed Up Deluxe Edition. I think it's called the Attack Mix, and I really like it. But yeah, M is one of the best songs on the record. Next up, the penultimate track is At Night. And the biggest thing that I remember about this song is that they have a very heavy, dominating bass line at certain points in the song. And it adds a lot of weight to this song. At Night has never been one of my favorite songs on this record, but I still think it's pretty solid. There's something about this song, though, that foreshadows a lot of Faith. Because Faith is a record that is very gloomy and dark and depressing. It's darker than 17 Seconds by far, I think. And so I think that it foreshadows some of the weight and the heaviness and the listlessness that you'll find on that album. Then finally, we end with the title track, 17 Seconds. 17 Seconds, according to Robert Smith, is a measure of time. And that's all there is to it. I've seen people online argue about what exactly 17 seconds means. I saw one person say that it is the amount of time that it takes for someone who has slit their wrist to die, which I don't think it's true. I mean, I haven't tested it, but like, I don't think it's true. But according to Robert Smith, it is a measure of time that seemed to show up in a lot of places. So, I mean, it's kind of a boring answer as to what exactly 17 seconds means. You know, the record is called 17 seconds, but it's like 35 minutes. So like that's like 17 times 100 or something, I don't know. And the song 17 seconds is 4 minutes and 1 second, so that's not 17 seconds at all. But the title track has probably always been my favorite song off this record. The lyric 17 seconds, a measure of life, is just something that gets stuck in my head. And him saying a measure of life is probably where you get the idea that it takes that long to die whenever you slit your wrists. That's probably where you get that connection from, but I don't really know that that's what he's saying. I kind of like the idea that 17 seconds is a measure of life just because life is made up entirely of moments. We can look at life broadly, we can break it down into years or weeks or months or days, but really in the end, life is just a series of minor moments leading from one to the next. And I think a lot of people have this idea that their life will start one day whenever they achieve this, whenever they achieve money or love or fame or wealth, whatever. But really, I think that what you have to remember is that life isn't something that happens then, life is happening now. Right now, you are living life. Watching this video, you are living life. In 10 minutes, whenever you're not watching this video, you will be living life. And so in some ways, because of that, 17 seconds is a measure of life as good as any other. And so with that, you have 17 Seconds, the album by The Cure. There are 2 more songs from this era, I'm a Cult Hero and I Dig You. I'm a Cult Hero is notable because it has Robert Smith's Mailman singing on it, and both tracks I think fit in more with Three Imaginary Boys than they do 17 Seconds. They're more upbeat. I don't really care for either of them if I'm being completely honest, but I do think that 17 Seconds is a masterpiece of a record. I think it's phenomenal. I was telling my cousin this, but I feel like I listen to like 80% of the post-punk I listen to in autumn and in winter. This is an album that is much better when listening to it on like a cold autumn day, I think. So even though I'm shooting this video on the last day of September, I think it's an album that will hit better in November or something. December, whenever. Whenever it's kind of cold and rainy, that's the time to put this album on. So this is the 3rd Cure album I've talked about, and I am going to have to rate it above Three Imaginary Boys and above the self-titled record. This record's great, go listen to it. So far as recommendations go, I don't have anything crazy. It's the kind of stuff that you would probably expect. I would recommend Juju by Susie and the Banshees. That's another dark album, and I think it has some really energetic guitars. But still, I think it fits in pretty well with this era of The Cure, and I would recommend like Bauhaus and Sisters of Mercy and like all the other goth bands. So far as unusual recommendations go, I would probably say to listen to Nirvana's MTV Unplugged. And this is a weird one, but the reason why I bring it up is because of the fact that a lot of the chord choices on that album feel very thoughtful in the same way that Robert Smith's do on this record. So because of that, a song like About a Girl reminds me of this record. And obviously Nirvana and The Cure are 2 entirely different bands, but still, that's kind of what comes to mind. And then if you like the piano stuff, I would recommend like The Frail off of The Fragile by 9 Inch Nails, and I would recommend Still by 9 Inch Nails, which is an acoustic and instrumental compilation, I guess. It has acoustic versions of older songs, and it has B-sides and outtakes. And so if you like the piano stuff on this record, listen to that one. So with that, I guess that's what I have to say about 17 Seconds. Thank you for watching. I will be covering Faith next. So thank you and have a nice night. All right, bye.